Hello, everybody. This is Jason from Con+3, and I'm here today with two Chaosium giants, Lynn Hardy and Mike Mason. Hello to the both of you.
Hello.
Hello, hi.
So, I'm going to start off with something that you've probably come across quite a lot in face-to-face conventions when you're on your exhibition stands. Because Cthulhu is a system that has a lot of stuff, a lot of meaty stuff. You've got a lot of different settings, supplements, and then there's all the kind of background of Cthulhu as well. So, of course, Lovecraft's writing, books, etc. And then you've got anything sort of pop culture. So there's a lot of stuff to Cthulhu. So, say you get somebody who comes along to your stand who's a bit kind of bright-eyed in awe. How do you explain the premise of Cthulhu and the premise of the game to somebody who's completely unfamiliar with it?
Go on, Mike. Take it away.
Uh, well, basically, I think ultimately, Call of Cthulhu is a game about mysteries and solving mysteries. So that's what I would initially talk about and say it's a game of mystery and horror, basically. But you create a character based on a real world kind of profession, like a private detective or a journalist, or it could be anyone really, and you are drawn into some form of mystery to solve. So if you enjoy, detective programs and mysteries, then this may be the kind of thing you like. It's got a horror kind of theme to it. So as well as that, you've got exploring the unknown, the strange, the weird as well, which kind of combines together. So if you enjoyed things like the X-Files or Fringe or Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then you're in the kind of right wheelhouse for kind of Call of Cthulhu in terms of what it's about: people getting together, encountering some sort of challenge and trying to overcome it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, very concise. I like it, and interesting that you compare to kind of more modern stuff like Buffy. Um, But as we know, there are a lot of different settings for Cthulhu. Obviously, 1920s is kind of the big daddy of them all, and that's kind of maybe the default setting that people start off with. But what is both of your favourite non-1920 settings for Cthulhu at the moment?
Ooh. I'm going to lean towards Gaslight purely because that's the next big project on my slate. So I'm kind of looking at that. Obviously from my gaming background, I've done a lot of sort of Victorian and steampunk gaming over the years, so I have a soft spot for certain elements of the Victorian era, not all of them. So yeah, that's probably my favorite one.
Yeah, I mean, I would normally probably choose Gaslight as well, but as Lynn has done that, I won't. And say that in the main, I really enjoy playing modern day scenarios. I mean, the Call of Cthulhu rulebook is designed to kind of allow you to play in the 1920s and the modern day. So one book does kind of both settings. And the modern day just allows you to kind of really draw upon, current and contemporary kind of fears and situations, and kind of throw them up in the air and mix them around and catch people out almost. Expect the unexpected. So while in a modern day everyone's got cell phones and can kind of communicate all the time, that really helps the game kind of move along, but also can be a problem. So working out how the mythos interferes with mobile phone signals is kind of fun as well. So
Hmm.
but modern day, I think it equally presents some interesting kind of dynamics and
You see, that's
challenges.
really interesting because I thought you were going to go for Pulp, which was one of the reasons why I went for Gaslight.
Well, I don't consider pulp a setting. I think
Oh.
the pulp Call of Cthulhu pulp Cthulhu book is set in the 1930s, but in the book it makes itself very clear that this is a set of mechanics and a type of style of game that you can apply to any setting. So that's the whole intent of the pulp book, is while there's a kind of a baseline setting from the 1930s, you can apply it to Gaslight, modern day, 1920s, Dark Ages, wherever you like. That's the whole point of pulp. You can pulp up whatever style of game or setting you want to.
I'm just thinking the idea of modern with pulp could almost be a Hot Fuzz type setting.
Could be, yeah, could be, yeah. Why not? Why not?
Oh.
I mean, now you got me thinking. I'm thinking like Deep Rising as well, and things like that. As
we're
cool.
going to have to do a Hot Fuzz convention game now, aren't we?
I was just thinking as well, especially with Stranger Things and that phenomenon coming along a couple of years ago. What about it is still modern, but the sort of 1980s vintage? Have you run any games in that period before?
Well, yeah, because I was writing games in the 1980s. So, yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, I think one of the strengths and beauties of Call of Cthulhu as a game and a system is you can apply it to anywhere and any time. So if you want to play in a game in the 1970s or 1980s and kind of riff off Stranger Things or that kind of style of genre, Call of Cthulhu kind of is very easy to encompass that, because the rules work with that. There's no change, and it's just about the dressing that you have on it and the kind of characters that you have the players create. So they create all teenagers or whatever it may be, and you present the world of the 1980s and set a scenario in a mall or the school, high school or whatever, and just go with it. The game supports that style of play. Equally, it would support a kind of a more kind of Victorian Sherlock Holmesian style of game, which is quite different to Stranger Things, but the same mechanics do the same things across those genres. It's just how you present them and weave the plot together, to kind of emulate that kind of style of genre, really.
Yeah. And I know that you've released a couple of newer supplements, so they've only been sort of through one edition before, like Harlem, Berlin as well. Was it your intention to expand on the settings or create sort of more diverse areas of play for people?
Well, always. I mean, it's interesting because Call of Cthulhu is one of those games where people are always a little bit wary about writing their own stuff, which is great for us, and great for our writers. Because mysteries can be quite hard to put together. So, why not explore all over the place, widen people's horizons, give them interesting and strange places to play in, and develop that side of things. So they're not always just in sort of like the Arkham area, because it's a big, scary world out there. So go and investigate it.
If you're playing Call of Cthulhu for some time, again, the point is to drill into the horror in that sense, and horror tends to be fear of the unknown. So playing outside the comfort zone of your familiar surroundings and moving the game to a different culture or country or time kind of amplifies that unknown to some degree, and allows you to kind of play with that to develop different styles of plots, meet different kind of characters, and different events happen. And so you're exposed to these different kind of situations through different cultures and people. That kind of adds to the richness of the game, and that feeling, that kind of, it's, in a sense, it's, it's no different to, those kind of classic films where people are, travel to a exotic location or somewhere different and have to kind of navigate their around, a stranger in a strange land kind of thing. And that can be, quite exciting, and you can, pick up a few things on the way, with it being a historical game, you can learn some stuff inadvertently while you're having some fun.
And that was one of the really interesting pieces of feedback I got from someone on the Berlin source book. was the fact that his players were actually more weirded out by Weimar Berlin than they were by the mythos. So they were actually quite relieved when the mythos turned up, because they got that. Whereas the setting itself was just so completely decadent and strange. They just really didn't know how to deal with it, how to cope with it, which was really interesting to hear.
Absolutely. And something I've learnt firsthand as well is, of course, a lot of research goes into writing scenarios and settings, as well as, people might pick things up and playing them. And weekly you're always sort of mentioning little things that you're looking at, both of you. So, give me a couple of things that you've learnt recently, or a couple of things you've had to research where you think, oh, I didn't realize that was a thing, or I never knew about that.
Scandinavian forest spirits and how they tie into various fairy stories. That was one. Various legal ages of consent in the United States as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of surprisingly ridiculous. I mean, not long ago, I was researching, distances within Russia in the 1920s. So in terms of how long does it take you to get from Leningrad to Moscow in the 1920s? What's the train time? What was the drive time? How long does it take, to walk from this location to this location? And then to things like, what is the what are some of the most deadly spiders in the world, and how do I turn real world kind of scientific information in terms of how fast a venom works and how fatal it may or may not be into game mechanics? What does that? How many d6 does that mean I roll for damage? And how do I take a spider bite that could be fatal, but for 80% of the time isn't, and try and map that into the mechanics so it can be fatal, but not most of the time? Those kind of crazy things I spend my time thinking about.
We have the most interesting internet search histories.
I bet you do.
And it always amazes me how I'm not on a list somewhere. I probably am on a list somewhere.
You probably are. Yes.
Especially after the last couple of weeks' search terms, they've been particularly weird.
How much time do you think goes into researching for things like scenarios? And is it something that you tend to do first, or can it depend on what you're actually writing or what you're writing for?
Writing a scenario is like a length of string, and everyone does it differently. There's no standard way to write a scenario. Every writer has their own approach that works for them. For me, in terms of that kind of combination of creativity and research which goes into a scenario, a lot depends on when and where I'm setting the scenario, because sometimes you can set the scenario and need no research whatsoever, because it is essentially a kind of a fantasy creation, an original creation. You're dealing with really normal things, so it's just set in a cabin in the woods. You don't really need any research because they're not going to go and do anything outside of the cabin. It's all very focused, and so you're just dealing with the action. Whereas setting something in the middle of Paris in 1927, you kind of need to get an idea of, well, where will they need to go? Does that mean they're going to need public transport? How long does it take to get between these places? How easy is it to get into certain places? And what happens if they start a gunfight in the middle of the street? What are the police likely to do in that case? So you can't. So the scenario events or locations inform your research. So for me, it tends to be, I'll make a note, I'll get the idea of the action and a plot of the scenario down, and then when I come to kind of fill that in terms of fully write it up, when I get to something that's clearly I need a bit of research, I just then kind of stop and then go and research that one thing, write it in, then move on, and then I kind of stop-start approach to some degree. That kind of what works for me. How about you, Lynn?
Oh, it very much depends on what I'm doing. I mean, something like Children of Fear, I had enough idea of which part of the world I wanted to set it in, so I went and did a whole load of research. I'd already done a whole load of research for another book, and the idea was originally to try and use some of the research that hadn't been used so that I didn't have to go and do a whole load more. That failed spectacularly. because I kept finding this weird thread that kept appearing in these various parts of the world, and that was actually more interesting than the plot I thought I was going to do. So I kind of switched and had to do a whole load more research around that instead. So that time I was listening to the research telling me, and sometimes I will just pick a guidebook, read through, see if there's any weird and interesting things that pop out that might make an interesting scenario, and then go with it. Sometimes if we're sort of like revising scenarios that other people have written, it's what Mike said, it's very much a case of, oh right, okay, I need to check this, I'll go and do the research for that to make sure that what's here is correct, that it works with the rest of the plot. Or it's you have a plot idea, as Mike said, so you go and research a specific place and location to make sure that it's going to work in that. So it changes constantly, but as a trained researcher, I have a very bad habit of disappearing off down a rabbit hole, and Mike has to yell at me occasionally to stop it.
The other thing I should say is, between scenarios, perhaps, in my own reading, I read a mix of fiction and non-fiction, and so particularly the non-fiction side, I'm reading something, and as I read it, it presents me some information. I think actually that would be really cool in the scenario, or that develops the idea for something in a potential scenario. So I'll make a note. So I've kind of done some, I kind of use my, own reading time to kind of do a bit of research, generally, and then that will go into my notebook to then refer back to and think, oh yeah, that was in that book. I'll go back to that book and now pull out the things I really need in terms of the research elements to inform the scenario that I now want to write. That's, kind of a bit horse before the cart, but it can help.
Yeah, it does. And because you never know when something is going to turn out to be useful. So I mean, I am surrounded by notebooks filled with notes from various projects that I can go back to at any point in time if I remember that there's something in there that might be useful for whatever it is I'm looking at next.
Okay. And hopefully now people have got more of an idea of just how much work goes into, books for Chaosium. But some in particular are infamously mammoth, say Masks, for example. So for somebody who's got the finished book in their hands, who thinks, oh, I'd love to run this, what tips would you give to a keeper who has run scenarios before? Maybe they've done a few one-shots of yours, but they've never done something as big and as gargantuan as Masks, such a long-term campaign. So what would you say to a keeper running that for the first time?
I think is not to be daunted by it, is to just understand that all a campaign is a series of linked scenarios. So if you've already run a few scenarios, it's just the same, except that they're linked in some way. And so the main kind of advice is just read the whole thing, get an idea of what the actual plot is. What is the grand plot? Understand, so that scenario, I see that links to that scenario because they learned this, and then that points them in this direction, and so forth. And then once you've got that kind of grand idea of what the big plot is, you can then just look at each scenario in isolation almost, and just focus and understand, well, this scenario is about a murder, this scenario is about a missing thing, and then in terms of preparation, you only need to prepare for the session ahead, and because once you've done your big read of understanding how it all connects together, you kind of you understand that, okay, I need to ensure that they get these clues, or they need to find these clues to move them forward. Once you've got that, you can just focus on the scenario itself and just treat that as you would a normal one-off scenario to some degree, in terms of understanding what the events are going to take place. I think just piecemeal it down, make manageable chunks is really what it's about.
Yeah, and we did try to put extra support in Masks for people who weren't necessarily used to running such a big campaign, so that the hints and tips are there, and the key things that they need to know about are there.
Awesome. So let's move on a little bit to upcoming things, which Lynn has mentioned a little bit of. Gaslight. I've seen people on social media going, "Oh, what's going on with it? What's going on with it?" and of course I'm very excited for it. So, what have been your highlights working on Gaslight? I'm not going to ask you about sort of release per se, but what have you enjoyed working on for Gaslight so far?
Actually, I haven't really done a lot on it yet. I wrote a couple of chapters for it beginning of last year, and then because schedules change depending on priorities, it kind of got put on the back burner for a while. So that's I've got another couple of books I need to do, and then I will be diving right back into it. Because a lot of it's already been written. Um, it's a case that I just now need to work out exactly what we've got, what's missing, and then start putting it together and bringing it into a coherent whole.
Okay.
So I'm quite
Yeah.
excited because I'm not entirely certain of what is in the in the secret folders on Dropbox. So I'm getting quite, I'm looking forward to reading them all.
Hmm.
For me, I did a bit of work on the Gaslight before kind of passing on to Lynn. One of the things in early editions of Gaslight that isn't very well presented, or even even presented at all, is actually understanding the joy to be had of playing non upper class characters in Gaslight. A lot of the earlier Call of Cthulhu stuff was very focused on playing upper class characters, and actually the fun in the Victorian era, you can play those, but playing all the working class kind of characters, it presents a whole new kind of layer and a range of possibilities that really make the game really interesting. And so I think opening up the kind of social strata of Gaslight more than it has been done before is one of those areas that I've enjoyed kind of looking at and then kind of doing some initial work on that Lynn's going to then kind of pick up and run with. So
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's kind of an inclination in the golden age of the 20s. You're at least well traveled, or you know a few people, and you might have a bit of money in your pocket. But especially with say if it's set in London in the Gaslight era, the poverty there, that's really good that you're putting a lot more opportunity to play. The poor, the say a Docklands work or something like that.
Yeah,
Cool.
why not be the Baker Street irregulars? These gutter
Yeah.
snipes and urchins who are going around and getting involved in mysteries and things. So yeah, that's certainly something we'll be building on.
Brilliant. And also, I've been seeing plenty of art popping up for the new Malleus Mastrorum edition. Um, it's looking amazing. So I know that Mike's been touching on that. So is that going to be something that's coming out in the near future?
yeah, that's kind of currently in layout. Really, we're just finishing the kind of last bit of proofing on the text, but essentially the book is entering into layout now, and it should only be no, I'm going to say around about a couple of months just to kind of get it all together and get it ready. But within 2 or 3 months we should have the first PDFs ready, and then print volumes to follow. Around again another sort of 2 or 3 months after that. So that's I'm looking forward to seeing those, because seeing the art in is going to be really exciting. And I spent a fair bit of time putting this new edition together, so it'll be nice to see that realized at last.
Yeah, it,
Yeah.
it really was a mammoth undertaking on Mike's part. It is gigantic and it's going to look absolutely stunning.
Awesome. So, is it something that you've just tried to refine in this edition, or is it a case of I know you've added new monsters, but are there things like new mechanics in there and things, or?
Um, n- Not new mechanics as such, but um, there's two major things I've done is for both monsters and the kind of mythos gods. I've added in material around how you create your own versions or your own unique kind of monsters, and I've presented a number of ways to do those. Through kind of asking questions, what the kind of questions you need to ask yourself, and providing some kind of formula for kind of deciding how big a monster is and what it can do and what powers it might have. So that's one angle that's kind of new to this edition. And the other thing is, I particularly with the gods, what I've done is they've all been kind of redeveloped from the ground up, rewritten to really encompass a much wider range of ideas and possibilities. And so they kind of present as here's information about a particular kind of mythos deity, but it's full of lots of plot ideas and scenario seeds and information on the people that, you know, the cultists that may worship this particular deity and how they may differ from a different cult and what they may do differently and so forth. So it kind of opens it up a lot more than perhaps previously, and gives a lot more kind of lots more ideas really for keepers to kind of just to use them in games or to create games around them, basically.
Okay. So, starting to wind down towards the end, but keeping on the subject of monsters for the moment. Of course, people will have their favourite elder gods and so on. I've got my own anyway. But what are your favourite minor monsters, if you were, say, just running a one-shot, or one particular that you like just because of how it looks or how it behaves?
Go on, Mike, you go first. I need time to think.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if it's a minor monster, but I really like star vampires. I like the fact that they're invisible, and I like how horrific they are. When they start feeding, they fill up with the blood they're sucking out of their victim, and you can then see their shape. You know, I think that's really kind of horrific and cool. But a really minor monster, I guess, would be something like the sand dwellers, who don't get a lot of looking from time to time, and for many years they were kind of underdeveloped and nobody really knew what to do with them. But the authors on Secrets of Australia, the Terra Australis book, did a lot of work on sand dwellers and to kind of introduce the idea of what their society may be and what they're interested in, and that I thought that was really interesting. So I think there's a lot of possibilities to explore with sand dwellers that have yet to be explored in that way.
I mean, I've got a soft spot for the Great Race of Yith, but you know, they get used quite a lot. In terms of just sheer creepy factor, I think rat things. There's nothing quite as revolting as a rat with a human face. But you know, you can use them as nice little jump scares on people.
Yeah, they don't. You know, there's a few of them in an occasional scenario, but they're not used greatly, and yeah, I think there's a lot of potential with the rat thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite often sometimes the underdog, as it were, that is the creepiest. Awesome.
What's yours, Jason?
Yeah.
To be honest, I really like a lot of the minions in Carcosa because that's just my favourite kind of mythos branch, if you will, with the King in Yellow. So things like the Biarki, even though they're quite the kind of classic creatures, just an idea of this devilish flying bat thing. I think it's something that would put terror into the normal person because it's been used in history or something similar for so long. And one of the highlights in a game I ran based around Carcosa was when a character was kind of driving a car, stopped the car when they saw this creature, and then got a critical hit using the windscreen wipers on it. So it turned out to be quite a funny scene, but at the same time, yeah, it was great. It was good. Okay, so finally, just for a bit of fun, I know that you two are avid tea drinkers, and you've kind of converted me a little bit to back to tea a little bit. But if Cthulhu drank tea, what would he drink?
Well, it would kind of have to be some sort of green tea, I would have thought. Ooh, possibly Formosa Dragon. That's not green tea, that's actually a black tea. I think there is a green tea version of it as well. But yeah, either Formosa Black Dragon or some sort of weird green tea. And there are some very weird green teas out there. Genmaicha, something like that. Just sort of like not quite what you're expecting.
I'd say either something like, is it mate or mate green?
Yes.
Mate, which is allegedly slightly hallucinogenic, or or probably I'd probably go with something decisive like Russian caravan tea, a good dark tea, full of strength to invigorate him as he rises from relay.
Yeah, you get the involuntary shakes and everything. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, you two, for being interviewed today. And thank you, of course, for the generous voucher donations. That's amazing of you.
You're very
Oh,
welcome.
that's fine. Very welcome.
for
No,
having
thanks
us.
very much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Take care. Hello, my name is Lynn Hardy. I'm the Associate Line Editor at Call of Cthulhu for Chaosium. And we're here to support Con+3 and the Butterfly Project, which is an awesome project helping support disadvantaged young people learn through play, which is incredibly important. So please be generous, donate, and enjoy your games. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Mason from Chaosium, Call of Cthulhu Creative Director, and we're supporting Con+3 and the Butterfly Project, and we encourage you to donate and play some games, have fun, and help Con+3 raise some cash for the Butterfly Project.